if you don't have visibility of where your money is going, like things always are going to fall through the cracks.
They're not willing to just like say no to debt. If this has to go on a credit card, I'm saying no. They're not willing to do that.
It's that idea of death by 1,000 cuts. It's the little expenses, and when you have so many of them, it wrecks your monthly budget.
Debt freedom there is nothing like it, and I will continue to say that. And until you get there, you won't understand.
If you're like, you know what, I'm tired of living like this. I'm tired of being paycheck to paycheck. I'm tired of having all this debt. This is where you can start to make progress. Welcome back to the show. Lauren and I are back for our weekly episode where we talk all things money. Now, Lauren, over the weekend, my wife and I took an Uber out to dinner, and I don't know how we got to this conversation, but the Uber driver was telling us about his monthly expenses, and he was saying that because of his student loans, his car loans, or his car loan, I should say, and some debt that he has from like a family business that he's involved in, that he has to bring in at least $5,000 a month just to cover the bills. And it kind of just blew my mind because I was thinking like, you know, for most people, I would say $5,000 a month after taxes just to pay your bills. Like that's a lot of money. And so, you know, later that night we got home and I was curious. So I looked at my own budget or our own budget, and what I would say is like our baseline budget, like what we need to bring in to pay the bills is also about $5,000. The difference is though, that pays for our mortgage, our utilities, groceries. It also maxes out our Roth IRAs for the year. And it makes sure that we have some like fun money, some spending money, going out money. And I don't know, it was just wild to think like our budgets on the outside, like they're both $5,000, but they're so different when you look at someone who has a ton of expenses versus someone who has, you know, almost no monthly expenses because they have zero debt.
Nick, how did you get this guy to talk to you about numbers? I need to know.
It was, you know, what's weird? I didn't mention anything about, you know, what I do or anything. And when we first got in the car, I thought he was listening to a podcast about like religion and stuff. He was actually just on a phone call with his friend. Oh. And then he just started talking about like life and then money. And it was a short Uber, but I don't know how we got to that topic.
Okay. Did you share our podcast with him?
I did not. Yeah, I did not. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing though. You know, I get 5K is definitely a high monthly expenses, but I will say since moving to Chicago and the fact that our rent is over $3,000 a month for our suburban home that we rent currently, I can see how that happens. Now, I don't know, you're in the Austin area, so rent down there is not necessarily that cheap either. But I can see how that definitely happens. Now, it sounds like his is a lot more debt. Ours is probably more heavy on like our rent than anything else, because I would say, you know, I was kind of taking a look at my budget and kind of adding things up. I would say for us to like run our household and just like put our bills there without investing in everything like that, probably around like 4,500-ish if we're talking about groceries, utilities, and all that stuff, including our rent, our insurance, things like that. But yeah, I can see how that adds up really quickly when debt's involved, and that's when it gets scary. You know, like obviously ours is a little bit higher, but you know, it's mostly our rent there. It kind of sucks when you're, you know, especially driving Uber to make 5K just to pay, you know, your student loans, your car, all the debt that you have. So yeah, that really sucks.
That's what got me. Cause like, you know, it's, if you look at our budgets, it's like, okay, ours, you know, we both have to bring in $5,000 to pay what, you know, we see as like our bills. Right. Yeah. But to know that from his point or from his side, it's to service all those different forms of debt. Like that's what makes it really hard. Whereas on our side, it's like, no, we don't have debt. And so we can look at our Roth IRA as another bill that has to get paid, or we can include in the budget, like making sure that they're spending money and that's always in there. You know, it's just, it was just wild to see like how different those two numbers can go for people who've, you know, on the one hand, they have a lot of debt still. On the other hand, like, you know, they've really taken control of their finances.
Yeah. And I think, for me, when I started like my debt-free journey and started realizing that if I could like decrease that debt, I would get to take a lot more of that money home and do what I want with it. And I think a lot of people like in theory, you know that, but like until you actually start to see that and like you're able to keep more of your paycheck, it's hard to like, you know, not have all these expenses or to prioritize paying off your debt. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because you just feel like this is month to month, this is just my life, and I'm going to continue living this way. But yeah, it's interesting once you do start to pay off that debt and you have more of that money to work with and to be investing in stuff, then life starts to get really fun. And I don't think a lot of people actually know that.
Yeah, and even beyond the debt, right? Like even if you're out of debt and you're kind of just living month to month, like the other thing as well is just looking at your monthly expenses and looking at the categories or like the expenses where it's just like random stuff. Like I always just call it like random BS each month. Like when you are not being intentional with your money, there's so much of that, right? And then when you start actually paying attention, you're like, you know what, I want to put this money towards whatever my goal is. Then you can start to see how much waste there is. But then once you eliminate that, like you said, you almost feel like you got a raise, and you're like, wow, I actually, I can make my money go further if I'm intentional with it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's definitely what happened with me whenever I started that journey and started paying things off. And when I was done with it, it was actually crazy. I almost felt like I didn't know what to do with all of my
Yeah.
extra money because I was so focused on paying off my debt that I had all this extra money coming in that I was like, I do see why people can go back into debt. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Because you just don't really know what to be doing with it. So that's where a plan comes into play. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on the topic of monthly expenses, I think today is really the perfect opportunity to talk about some practical tips, ways that people can start to reduce their monthly expenses so that, like we were talking about, they can get to that place where they feel like their money goes further, almost like they got a raise without actually earning any more money. So why don't we jump into this first tip? And the first one is to know where your money goes, or in other words, to track your expenses. And I think that's the most important one. Like if you don't have visibility of where your money is going, like things always are going to fall through the cracks. Even if you're like, oh, like I'm aware of what my expenses are, but you're not aware of like where every single dollar is going. Like that to me, like that's what I see so much is people are like, no, I know what all my bills are, right? Like I know what has to get paid and when it has to get paid. But then where's the rest of the money? And if you're not paying attention to where every dollar goes, there's room for things to fall through the cracks and to feel like it's tighter than it really needs to be.
Yeah, I think a lot of people live in that space between like, oh yeah, I sort of know my expenses, but they don't actually know where their money's going.
Yeah.
That this step right here, and a lot of these things we're going to say today are super basic because it
Hmm.
is basic. You just have to put the work in. But for me, when I started the whole money journey, coming into my debt freedom journey, this was step one, knowing where
Yeah.
your money goes. And I literally sat down with a pen and paper and wrote down exactly where I was spending my money. Now, this doesn't mean you need to change anything right away. We just want you to get into the habit and get that muscle going of
Hmm.
knowing where your money's going. Because then you start to look at it and you're like, okay. Your mind is now seeing where things are going rather than it being so mindless and you're just not really paying attention to it. So I think this is probably one of the most important things when it comes to like understanding your expenses.
It's the most important thing. It's probably the simplest thing you can do, but it's also the one where you can really tell like how bad does someone want to make a difference in their life. And I see it all the time where people are like, what can I start doing to improve my finances? I'm like, if you can just have full clarity, full visibility, like, most of the stuff is not, it's not, how do I phrase this? Like it's simple things that you need to do, but it's just hard to do them consistently
Yeah.
for years after years, right? But I always tell people like, hey, just start tracking everything. And chances are you're probably going to notice what are the problem areas, and almost like that sense of guilt that you get when you have to write down like, okay, I went out to coffee like 5 times this week, and then I went shopping, and then I had these random trips at Target. You'll feel a little bit of guilt, especially if these other areas in your life aren't going the way you want them to, and it's related to your finances. You're going to feel that guilt, and naturally you're going to start to say, all right, I don't want to go through that experience of writing that expense down again. So maybe I'll avoid it this time. It's like we've talked about this before, but that's why I see so many parallels between fitness and finances, because it's the same thing. Like if you're trying to lose weight, for example, right? Like it's a simple equation. You either eat less or you work out more or you do a combination of both, right? And the easiest way you can see like why am I not losing weight is just writing down everything you eat, and you'll start to realize, oh man, I'm spending more, I'm eating more than I actually realize. This
Yep.
step is just so important.
Nick, this is so relatable because Eddie and I are doing a mini cut right now, like just a quick,
Nice.
like yeah, like just a quick summer sort of cut. We're only doing it
Mhm.
for like a month, and then we're done with it. But and I haven't done anything like this, and I haven't touched my Fitness Pal app since it was my bodybuilding days, like 9 years ago. So it's been an interesting thing. But what I will say is, since I haven't done it for so long, I was like really excited to like get back on and start tracking a little bit to see where I'm at. Obviously, when you're in a deficit, like you really need to track, but
Yeah.
that's been super helpful for me. Like I have to track everything I'm eating, or I don't realize how much I'm eating. And it's clear how much I was eating whenever now that I'm in a deficit and I'm tracking everything. So
Yeah.
exactly like your money. knowing where everything is going is going to be important to, seeing where all of your money's going, what expenses you have, and how to make a plan moving forward. Now, in addition to that, I think tracking your money is a great thing, but now there needs to be a plan along with it. So I think budgeting also comes into play here. So for me, when I started my journey, I just took inventory at first, really wrote down where things were, where they were going. And then I decided what the plan was going to be from there. So that's really what a budget is. You're really just budgeting out all of your expenses. So, and then you can sort of clear things up from there. And that's where the key is to minimizing your expenses. You're going to take those expenses that you've already tracked and then move it into a budget. And if you know, hey, I don't want to be going out to lunch or coffee 5 times a week, then I know I'm not going to budget that much for it and I'm going to change my ways. So that's how you can reduce your expenses there through tracking and then creating a budget that matches your lifestyle and how I guess your financial goals moving forward.
100%. And I always tell people too, like, this is like a pre-step that you take. If you want to start budgeting, like, do this first.
Yes.
Because it's going to make the budgeting process so much easier. It's going to make sure that you don't run into so many mistakes or so many, like, times during the month you're like, oh man, I probably should have had more money here, or I could have had less money here. Because if you're tracking everything, then all right, when I start my budget, even if like you got to kind of walk into this journey, right? This was the first step. Let me just track it all. All right, now that I'm actually going to sit down and write a budget, how much did I spend last month on groceries? All right, maybe I can kind of modify that number and include it in the budget. Or what are my monthly expenses, right? Like, what are my utility bills? What do those typically look like? That's how you can actually get super accurate with a budget. But I think this tip and talking about budgeting, that kind of leads into tip number 2, which is to audit your recurring expenses. And this is where I would say people should do as they start to move from, all right, I'm tracking my expenses. Now I want to put it into a budget. Well, let's audit everything I'm going to throw in here, right? I know what was a full month, right? What that picture looked like. Now I want to refine it into something that I'm intentional with. And that's where I think auditing your expenses, that really comes into play. And again, if you're not tracking your expenses, chances are there's subscriptions, there's bills that you just don't know you're paying for. Maybe they're higher than they need to be. But if you actually take the time to track everything, now you can actually look at, all right, how do I audit these things to make sure that I have as little monthly expenses as possible? That to me was a big thing for me as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they're not even looking at their bank accounts. So there's obviously subscriptions or whatever coming in and out, and they're not even realizing it.
Yeah.
I think of the business model that Planet Fitness has, and I think they almost bank on people signing up to go to the gym and then just not going because and the amount is so small. Like at 15, $20, like it's something you're not really going to notice every single month. And you actually have to go to the physical location to like cancel your membership. So a lot of people are just not going to do that. So I think this is a really, really good step that people need to do. In addition to those, subscriptions or whatever that's coming out that you're not really aware of, there could be some fraud in there too. I know my mom was telling me, someone kept taking out like a little bit out of her bank account, like, just to kind of test the waters, I think. And she actually had to close that account and get a new card because that was something that was coming in and out. And if you're not looking at your bank, someone could really be siphoning off the top there. So that's super important to keep in mind here. But I don't even know the statistics, but I think there's a lot of people out there that have subscriptions coming out that they're not even fully aware of,
Well, and I think when you ask people like how many subscriptions do you have, like they're probably not thinking of all of them that they do have.
No.
Like, right, you could have there's at least 5 streaming services out there, right? Like, and most people have like 3 or 4 of them. Okay, so there's 3 or 4 subscriptions right there. You just mentioned a gym membership, something like Amazon Prime too, right? Like there's just so many different areas where you can have subscriptions. Even if you download like an app on your phone and that has like a drawing app and it has a monthly subscription, or like a note-taking app, like there's so many ways that you can have these subscriptions, and that's where they get you. Like you said, if it's like 5, 10, 15, $20, right? You're like, it's not that big of a deal. And we've said this so many times before, but like, it's that idea of death by 1,000 cuts. Like, rarely is it ever going to be in someone's budget where it's like, here's one thing that's just ruining everything, and if we can fix that, then everything else is good. No, it's usually like a bunch of little things that on their own totally insignificant, right? Like on their own they don't make any difference, but you have like 10 of them, or you even 5 of them, right? 5 of them at $20 a month, there's $100 you could free up right there. It's the little expenses, and when you have so many of them, it wrecks your monthly budget.
Yeah. And I will say I even have some of those yearly that I almost sort of forget about. and they'll like there's like apps. Like I have an app for like it's like a swimming app like that I can track all the scores because my husband's a swim coach, so I like to do that. And it
Nice.
comes out yearly, and not that it's super expensive, but I'm like it'll just come out randomly in like November, and I'm like, oh, like I forgot about that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and then actually another one was the Blink subscription for Amazon Blink. We don't even have that right now, and it charged me like not that long ago. It's for their like security cameras and
Oh,
for like the cloud storage. And we had it at our old house, but here like our landlords gave us their like the ring to use. So I was like, it came out of my account like not too long ago, and I was like, oh, I don't even use that anymore. You know what I mean? So I was like, I'm gonna
yeah.
get in right now and cancel that because if I don't, I'm gonna forget and it's gonna happen again next year. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's just these little tiny and again, it's not even that much, $30 here, $10 here, but it really adds up if you just continue
Yeah.
to let it happen instead of like actually going into your account, taking inventory, closing the things you need to. Yeah, definitely. Like, what do you always say? Death by a thousand cuts or something.
Death by a thousand cuts. Like
Yep.
it's, you get one paper cut, you're fine. You get
Yeah.
1,000 paper cuts and all of a sudden you're bleeding to death, So
Yeah.
that's a
And
little graphic, but
do we really need, if you are, and this is a great place to reduce your expenses, if you are looking to create some room in there, yeah, get rid of some of those some of those streaming services. Like it adds
Yeah.
up, I'll be honest, we do have a few of those, not that we're needing to like, decrease our expenses at this point in our, journey, but it does add up. I was talking to somebody about it, somebody I was working with, and we were adding it up, and I think she was at like $80 a month for just like TV. And I was like,
yeah.
girl, you can just take Netflix and you just use Netflix. Like you need to cancel everything else. Like, that's crazy to be spending that much, especially whenever you're, paying off debt or whatever.
Well, and especially on the streaming services one, I'm like, you're not going to watch more than one thing like at a time in a sitting, right? So commit to this month I'm going to have Netflix. Maybe next month I could have Hulu or Max or Disney Plus, whatever it is. Like you can still have all of them. Just pick one, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you can kind of switch as you switch your shows that you kind of watch. But I don't know, it kind of got me thinking too, like so we're still in our apartment while we're renovating the home, and I just kind of jumped the gun on everything, and I was like, all right, let me get all my utilities set up. And one of those utilities, because we had like this concierge service through our agent who was like, oh, do you want to set up, X, Y, and Z? So we set up our internet, and it comes with like a TV package as well. And I was like, yeah, we want to get that set up. And they started charging us monthly, even though we're not living in the house. And let me tell you, when my wife was like, so we're paying like $80 a month and we're not even there. Like I called, it's Spectrum. I called them. I was like, hey, like my wife is really pissed off at me because I started this. Anything you can do. They're like, we can put you on like a seasonal hold. So they're like, you can't use the service, but we'll give you 50% off for like 4 months or whatever. I was like, that is perfect. So yeah, but like that in line with like just auditing your expenses, like there's so many times where people, you look at their budget and they're like, well, these little things, they don't make a difference. But like you said, you add those up, and then if you're trying to get out of debt, like $80, $200 a month, like, that range of money, that can make such a big difference towards actually starting to make progress.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Why don't we move on to the next one? So all of this does kind of revolve around building a really solid budget, but I would say tip number 3 is to set limits on those high spend categories. And so if you're kind of following this in order, right? You started tracking your expenses. You know what that is. You can put that into a budget. Now you're starting to say, all right, do I want to include these things or not? Well, now you also know what are some of the problem areas in your spending. And, it's different for everyone, right? Like I was working with this couple is a family of like 7, and they were having an 8th child on the way. Their grocery bill was like $2,000 a month, and they made great money, right? But $2,000 a month is a lot. And so when we looked at one of their high spend categories, it was groceries. And so it was like, how can we go from like 2,000 down to like 1,750, right? Now we've freed up $250 a month that we can actually start putting towards paying off debt. For a lot of people, it's going to be that dining out or the miscellaneous money or expenses, I should say, or subscriptions or gym memberships, right? Like what are these high spend categories, and can we start to put a limit on it so that we're being a little bit more strategic? Because I think in everyone's budget, they're going to have like that problem area. All right, taking a quick break from today's episode, Lauren and I have some exciting news we'd like to share with you. If you're feeling stuck with your finances and don't know where to start, we have you covered with our one-on-one financial coaching.
These are no strings attached coaching sessions that you can sign up for today. No ongoing commitment. You simply book a session whenever you need one.
Each call is 90 minutes, and by the end of it, you'll have a clear budget to work with and a solid plan to start paying off your debt. Plus, we'll make sure you walk away with some awesome tools to keep you on track, including our budget dashboard and expense tracker, tracker, as well as our debt payoff optimizer.
And the best part, you'll get to work with both of us on the call. Together, we'll help you develop the best possible strategy forward, answer your questions, and make sure you feel confident about managing your money.
So if you're ready to get a handle on your budget and kickstart your financial journey forward, check out the link in the show notes to book your first session.
We can't wait to get started with you. Now, back to the episode. Yeah, absolutely. And I think mine, not that I mean, not really a problem area, but I think it's that miscellaneous category.
Yeah.
I've actually started to get better at like breaking that out a little bit, because I was just putting like anything sort of mishmash in there, but then I'd have like $500 a month that was like going towards that. And I was like, I don't love that. It's just a category that's just like for miscellaneous. Something else I think about these sort of categories that we're talking about could be your bigger sort of purchases, which would be like your rent, not purchases, but like your monthly expenses. So like your rent, or like your car and things like that. So being mindful about those types of things too. I know like rent is obviously, a little bit different for everybody based on where you live and, where you want to live, I guess. But those are the types of things you want to think about, because you can cut down on these smaller areas, but if you can make some bigger changes in those really big items, that's probably where you're going to see some of the biggest movement as far as your expenses go. So if you can find a cheaper apartment, or maybe take on a car that is not as expensive as you're currently driving, those are some of the things that can really move the needle a little bit quicker.
Yeah, and I feel like whenever we get to the conversation of like live somewhere that's cheaper or drive something that's less expensive, that's where you get a lot of pushback from people. And it's like, look, like you don't have to do these things. It's fine if you don't. But if you want to make progress and you're not going to suddenly start earning, an extra $1,000 a month, like you said, we can either audit all the little things and that's going to free up some money, or we can look at the big items in your budget. And like you said, rent and car or transportation, I should say, that's like the two big areas. And like, I know like here in Austin, like you can get an apartment for $1,100 a month and it's not going to be super fancy or anything. Right. Yeah. You can also go downtown and pay like $3,000 or $4,000 a month. Right. So there's a range. And I know in certain areas, like we used to live in the Bay Area, like you weren't finding a place to live. Like if you were getting $1,100 a month, you were like a room inside of a house with like 5 other people, so like I totally get like expensive areas versus more affordable areas. But again, you don't have to do these things. It's just like, if you want to make progress, right? If you're like, you know what, I'm tired of living like this. I'm tired of being paycheck to paycheck. I'm tired of having all this debt. This is where you can start to make progress. Yeah.
And you have to make some sacrifices if you want to change your life, Of course, we're in the Chicago area. It is expensive here. We know that. But at the same time, we're not in a place in our life where we feel like we have to, cut corners on comfortable living for ourselves. So we have a house in the suburbs that we're renting and we like being here. Could we be closer to the city in an apartment high rise? Yes, absolutely. And we probably could pay $1,500, $1,600 a month in rent compared to $3,200. But that's just what we chose to do, and that's what our lifestyle surrounds us. But we're not really in that point where we need to like decrease expenses at this point. But if we were, that would be a great way to sort of do that by looking around, shopping around, seeing what else is out there. Because there's definitely, even in these higher cost of living cities, there are places that you can, make those adjustments. Nick, curious, what was I don't have any California experience, but I've always heard it's so expensive. What is what is like an average apartment, like 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom apartment in like the Bay Area?
Ours was it was a 2 bedroom, 2.5 bath. It was renting for $3,200 a month.
Wow.
And we were in Santa Cruz, California, which is like South Bay Area, which some people don't even call it Bay Area. Yeah. And that's like a beach city. So it's like, you're kind of paying a little bit of a premium, but it doesn't get much cheaper if you get into like the big city, like San Jose is like the next biggest city. Yeah. Like it doesn't get much cheaper if you go to San Jose. Now I do know like, someone I knew was renting a room, and this is where I got that number from. They were renting a room $1,000 a month or $1,100 a month or something. And it was a room in a house with 5 bedrooms. And so there was 5 people living there sharing kitchen and bathrooms and everything. But that's how they got it down to $1,000 a month. So it's still possible in areas like this, but like, yeah, it's like, if you live in California, you live in like, I'm trying to think of all the expensive places like New York or wherever it is, right? Like you're going to pay a premium to live there, but there's still going to be ways that you can cut down on this. But you had mentioned like you guys aren't in this place in your life where like you have to be, or where you can afford to spend a little bit more on where you want to live. And I think that's an important note too, because people forget like what season of life they're in. You know, I think a lot of people get stuck in like that emotional state of like, well, I want this, or I should be able to get this. Like you should, you shouldn't, that doesn't really matter. Like if, do you want to get to this goal out in the future? If you do, then this season of life is how do I cut back? You know, and if you know, the more you sacrifice, the shorter that season of life can be, so that you can get to the next season where it's like, all right, now we're in a place where we can spend a little bit more on where we live, or we can go out more, or we can have all these subscriptions or whatever it is, you know, like looking at those seasons of life and being like, all right, which one am I in now? Which one am I in right now so that I can get to where I want to go?
Yeah, I love that. And I was just actually thinking about that this morning. Like, I wish I could tell everybody, like, because there's a lot of people out there, they do not want to change their current lifestyle. They want to
Yeah.
continue living the way they are. They do not want to have to sacrifice in any type of way. But if like you could literally just do it for like maybe 2 years, sacrifice
Yeah.
2 to 3 years, and then you're done with it. You don't have to carry your student loans with you for the next 10, 20 years. You could actually live a life like debt freedom is there is nothing like it. And I will continue to say that. And until you get there, you won't understand what it feels like to not owe anybody anything, you know? Because could I have just continued to live my life and carried my student loans around, paid off my car slowly? Sure. But now it's like, I've just like, you know, I've just like rocketed myself into the future. And I'm just like, I have all these things that I want now. And like, not material things, but just like kind of like freedom of like, if I
Yeah.
am off for a few months from work, like it's okay because I don't have all these payments sitting on top of me. But yeah, I think that too many people don't want to think about the season of life that's like, maybe this is a time to sacrifice, and then in like 3 years, like it's just like incredible.
Yeah.
You know?
And I feel like the hard part is that people don't get started on their, for a lot of people, they don't get started on their financial journey until they're like, you know, quote unquote, like adults, you know, like they're set into adulthood. Like maybe they're in their early 30s and they're like, well, life should look like a certain way. Right. And so they almost want to put on they create this facade of what their life should look like. And it stops them from doing what's necessary, right? They can't recognize the season of life that they're in because of it. But you had kind of talked about it, and I think that leads us perfectly into tip number 4, which is to avoid debt. And like just like I was talking about at the beginning, between, you know, my wife and I's monthly expenses and versus like the Uber driver's monthly expenses, debt is what made the difference there. You know, like you could say, well, we're not 100% debt free because now we have a mortgage. Like, all right, we're not counting mortgages here, right?
Yeah.
Like the difference between someone who has a ton of debt versus no debt, it's like your life can look totally different, even on the same like face, like dollar amount, you know, at a surface level. Like your two lives can look so different because for most people, like their life is restricted in my mind because of how much they have to spend servicing their debt.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I just kind of walked through, like I like once I paid off all of my debts and then had that money freedom there, it was almost like crazy. Like I couldn't believe that I didn't owe anybody anything. That money was mine to be able to spend, save, invest that in any way that I wanted to. And I think a lot of, like you said before in the last tip, like people are a little bit avoidant of changing their lifestyle a little bit. Like they're not willing to just like say no to debt. If this has to go on a credit card, I'm saying no. They're not willing to do that. But that if you want to decrease your expenses and change your life a little bit, try it. You know what I mean? Like you're going to surprise yourself and see exactly how big of a difference that would make if you would just start to say no, and then your credit card bills start to come down and you have a little bit more flexibility with it, but you're going to have to say no to some things. So avoiding debt, saying no, it's going to have to be in your vocabulary.
Yeah, 100%. And like a really good way to look at it, like for example, you were talking about your student loans. I know for my wife and I, like when she first graduated college, like her number one goal is I want to pay off my student loan debt. And like that was an awesome goal. She paid off, similar to you, it was like 50 grand between like her undergrad and master's. And like when you think about it now, like her sisters are also they're a few years younger than her, and so they have some student loan debt. Like their monthly payments, right? Like it's equivalent to maxing out your Roth IRA for the year.
Yep.
You know, right? Like for right now, if you want to max out your Roth IRA for 2025, $583 a month. I would say a lot of people have a similar debt payment, whether it's a car, student loans, the accumulation of their credit cards, right? And it's like, look, like you can put that towards debt, or you can put that towards maxing out your Roth IRA. And, you know, in 30 or 40 years, like now we're talking $1 million+ if you put that into the market and let it grow, right? Like it's just, I don't know, it's just wild when you start to look at it that way. It's like, what could this money be doing for me instead?
Yeah, and if you think about, everything we've talked about today, you're really understanding where your money's going. You're, taking inventory, you're cutting things out, things that you don't need. You almost have to avoid debt. Or if you
Yeah.
keep taking on those payments or, you know, increasing your credit cards and then your payments are more like you're not even doing much as far as like
Yeah.
decreasing your expenses at this point. This is almost a necessary step to stop the bleeding, I guess.
Hmm.
And something else I think about, it's like debt just creates more payments for you, right? So that's
Yeah.
why you have to say no to it. But also those things like what are those like Klarna and all those like pay later
Oh
services, buy
yeah.
now pay later
Yeah.
services, where they're like you can buy this pair of leggings for $12 a month for the next 4 months. And I'm like, just say no to that stuff. If you cannot pay for it without going into debt, stop doing that. You do not need to be spreading out and adding payments on because yeah, it seems like a something that you can afford, but you're just adding more and more expenses on, and that's why the Uber driver has those issues because of things just like that. So yeah,
Do you remember when people used to use the phrase "it was on layaway"?
yes, yeah, for like
Right, that's not even. Yeah, it's not even a thing anymore because
no,
now it's just so common to just like, oh, I put it on Klarna or on Afterpay or whatever it is.
yep,
Yeah, the wild thing is you can do it for almost anything,
yep,
even like on my credit card, right? Like I have a Chase credit card. If I
yeah,
make a purchase that's above a certain amount, they're like, hey, do you want to break this up in five, and we'll give you back the difference, and then you can just pay us back zero interest. And the hope is I miss one of those,
yeah,
and then they charge all of that interest. Like
hmm,
it's just wild to look at it like that. But yeah, I think the avoiding debt one, like it's just such a big one. I think like
hmm,
people don't realize how accustomed we've become to like having debt, and then what your life could actually look like without it. And when I'm talking to someone about getting out of debt, it's weird to hear that like for a lot of them the motivation is, oh, I want my credit score to go up because I want to be able to do these things in life, like get into a nicer apartment
uh,
or get a better car or
yeah,
eventually own a home, and I need my credit score to go up for that. I'm like, your credit score is not a thing that you should worry about, right?
yeah,
It should just happen as a byproduct of good financial habits. And let me tell you, if you practice good financial habits, it will, like, your score will just naturally go up, right? You keep credit card debt, or you I was gonna say keep it at a minimum. No, you have zero credit card debt. You're on top of all your payments. Like your credit score is gonna get as high as it can be, right? But it's just wild to me when I'm like, well, why isn't the goal to get out of debt? Why is the goal to increase this number, which will allow you to borrow more or whatever it is, you know?
yeah. And I think that's interesting that you said that they say they want to get out of debt to increase their credit score for X, Y, and Z. And most of those things that you mentioned were like increasing the lifestyle, so making more
Yeah.
expenses for themselves. And it's like I don't know. I just think that that all comes back into a bad circle.
100%. 100%. Why don't we move into our last tip for the day? Tip number 5. This one, I think people are always going to look at this as a cheesy one, but like work towards a specific financial goal in mind. And I say financial goal, it doesn't even need to be a money goal. Like work towards a specific goal in life, and chances are it's going to have like a financial aspect to it. And the reason why it's so important, like usually when I start working with someone on getting their money in order, like this is where you got to start too, right? Like this even I would say happens before you start tracking your spending. Like this is like the number one thing that's gonna like spark or ignite like a change in you, right? Is having a specific goal in mind. And for some people it can be like a tangible goal, like I want to get out of debt, or I want to go on, like be able to go on more vacations or travel more. I want to eventually own a home. Those are like some really great tangible goals. I think for a lot of people there's also like emotional goals as well. Like I want to stop feeling stressed out anytime the topic of money comes up. I want to not be afraid to open up my bank account. Like I think if you have a specific goal in mind, like really really specific, like I want it to look, I want my life to look this way, like then making these decisions with your money becomes so much easier.
Yeah, like you said, I feel like this one needs to come first because when you have that specific goal in place, then doing all of these other things makes so much
Yeah.
more sense. And you actually have a reason for doing that. I think too many people, they know that they should be doing XYZ with their money. They know that, they're not spending well, but there's just no reason for them to change their behaviors. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They just haven't looked at it, they haven't thought about it enough. So, really having that more specific financial goal really needs to be at the forefront so that you have a reason to track your
Hmm.
expenses, to create a budget, to avoid debt, and to actually feel like you're getting somewhere, to be logging your progress, to make it worth your while, I would say.
Yeah. And that's I think you had mentioned this as well for you, but like that's what started it for me, and then which eventually started it for me and my wife was like, we wanted to own a home, like, and it was super cheesy, super lame, but like we had adopted a dog, we wanted a nice big backyard for that dog, right? Like that was the goal in our mind. That
Yeah.
like this is why we want to get our finances in order. This is why we want to start saving more. This is why we want to eventually buy a home, and like that was so deeply tied to like, well, we really love our dog and we want our dog to have the best life that we could possibly give him. And so buying a home, it just, and your brain will make, all these connections in a weird way. Looking back on it, like I probably could have had an even deeper reason for wanting to do this, but like for us, that was enough, right? That got us through like almost 5 years, I should say, of intense saving, where it was like, hey, we're trying to save like $2,000 plus a month. And that meant saying no to a lot of things, right? That meant saying, and we had to have this conversation. It was like, hey, like if this is our goal, then we gotta be okay with saying no to things that are kind of like aren't in line with that goal, and it's not saying no to everything. It's just like you got to have like this threshold in your mind where it's like, all right, if this experience or this purchase, whatever it is above that threshold, I can say yes to it every single time. But anytime it's below it, then I got to be okay with saying no to it, even if it kind of sucks, and that meant saying no to like going on family trips that like weren't big family trips or, whatever it was, like purchases or going out consistently, it was like, hey, this goal is so much more important. And that's how you got to frame it too, is like, no, this goal is important, way more important than what we're going to do today. Otherwise, you're just going to look at it as like a life of restriction. And that's no fun for anyone.
Yeah. And I was just going to add, you sort of were reading my mind there. I was going to add sort of like a bonus here. Like, only spend, like, think about, you've already thought about, where your money's going, where you're tracking, what you're cutting out, but like, think about what you actually want to be spending your money on. It should be what matters to you and what you're prioritizing spending your money on. If it is not on that short list of things, then don't spend money on it. Like, prioritize what you want and cut the rest. Like that's where I think that's where the biggest movement is going to be, is by just saying no. And I'm not going to be spending money on this because I want to achieve this goal, or, because I don't want to be spending money on going out to eat every day for lunch. You know what I mean? Like there's things you're just going to have to say no to. And that was what I was going to say. Like, there's so many things that, you can prioritize in your budget, but you're going to have to say no to a lot of things. And it's probably the things that you don't care about anyway. So just get it out of there. I know there's a lot of us, including myself, looking through your budget and stuff or your bank statement, you're like, I didn't need to spend money on that, but being a little bit more mindful about it will definitely help to kind of, decrease your expenses.
Yeah, it just makes, like you said, it makes saying no to things, like it makes it easy, because if your goal is important enough, then like, the things that you're doing just to maintain a certain lifestyle, you can start to look at them on an individual basis. Like, do I really need to get this coffee every single morning, or like order lunch with the group of people at my work who order lunch every day? Like, is that like, am I really going to let this thing hold me back from getting that? And if I am, like, cool, like it better be worth it. Cause if it isn't, then you're just kind of being silly about it.
Yeah. And I hear the argument all the time, like, well, you can't buy a house if you just save on, $2 avocado toast or whatever, like people always hate on that sort of mindset. But I'm like, it almost like is more about like the bigger things. And like, if you just continue to have that mindset that you can just spend on whatever, like you're never going to change in any type of area. You know what I mean? So it's really just creating those habits of saying no and prioritizing where your money should be going rather than like spending the $3 or whatever at the coffee shop,
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, because it's not about, oh, well, you can't go out and have coffee and it's $5 a day, or you can't have that avocado toast, which I don't know. I think if you order avocado toast from somewhere, you're spending at least $12. But it's not about saying no to those things. It's just about like you said, like having the right kind of mindset about it. Like where you start to look at every single dollar as being equally important. The dollars you spend on paying your rent, the dollars you spend on putting in money into your savings, into your retirement, all those dollars have the same value, right? And so is it really worth it to put this dollar towards coffee that I can make at home, and I can make it taste just as good if I spend, 10 minutes looking up on YouTube, how do I make a good coffee or whatever, and could I get more value of putting that dollar towards whatever my goal is? Like you got to have that kind of mindset. Otherwise, like I said, otherwise you're going to start to see these things as like, well, this is silly. Like I should be able to spend my money on whatever I want to, it's like you should, but you're just not there yet either.
Yeah. Well, I loved all these tips to kind of, decrease expenses and really get your spending in control, because let's say that, bringing it back to your Uber driver story, let's say he really does all these things. And then maybe he doesn't have to drive Uber. Maybe he's doing that on the side as like a part-time job to make all that extra money to pay all those debts. If he starts to decrease his expenses and pays off his debt, like, look, you have all that freedom now. You don't have to be out here, doing this on the side. But until you start changing some things, your situation is going to remain the same, and you're going to be continuing to Uber drive for this foreseeable future,
Yeah. And that's the difference, right? Like that's what I would say it is like the need to do these things, right? Like I have to drive Uber, or I have to go like do DoorDash or whatever. I have to work a second job. It's like the reason you go through tips like this is so that it no longer becomes like a requirement just to exist, just to service your monthly expenses.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that wraps up today's episode. And, as always, the best way you can help us grow is by sharing this with a friend and considering to subscribe.
Yeah. And if you want to have your money question answered on the show, you can visit our website, justanothermoneypodcast.com, and click the submit a question button. And don't forget to join us for another episode of Just Another Money Podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations provided on this podcast are for entertainment purposes only and do not constitute professional financial advice. Any financial decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are your responsibility. We strongly recommend consulting with a licensed financial advisor or other qualified professional before making any significant financial decisions. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that we are not liable for any financial outcomes.